On June 30, 1956, two commercial airliners collided over the Grand Canyon National Park, killing all 128 passengers and crew members on board. The causes behind this tragic accident, along with its severe consequences, marked a turning point for aviation regulations and safety standards. To fully understand how the crash occurred, we will conduct a detailed technical analysis to determine exactly how the events unfolded and identify the factors that caused it. On the day of the disaster, both flights had taken off from Los Angeles International Airport just 3 minutes apart. Trans World Airlines Flight 2, a Lockheed L-1049A Super Constellation, was flying from Los Angeles to Kansas City, while United Airlines Flight 718, a Douglas DC-7, was headed for Chicago Midway. Both were four-engine piston airliners capable of cruising above 20,000 feet at nearly 300 knots, high performance for commercial operations in the mid-1950s. Back then, air traffic control worked very differently than it does today. Large areas of the western United States weren't constantly covered by radar, so separating aircraft depended on estimated positions, radio reports, and ultimately pilots simply seeing and avoiding each other. Above 18,000 feet, this approach already showed clear limits between theory and real-world operation. United's DC-7 was cleared and flying at 21,000 feet on a heading of about 46 degrees. The TWA Super Constellation was cruising at 19,000 feet, but soon requested to climb to avoid turbulence associated with cloud layers. That initial request to climb to 21,000 feet was denied because that altitude was already assigned to the United flight. Instead, TWA requested a 1,000 on top clearance, a now obsolete procedure that allowed pilots to fly above a cloud layer under visual flight rules, with the explicit condition that avoiding other traffic was entirely the crew's responsibility. Granting that clearance created a critical gap in safety. The Super Constellation could climb to the same altitude as the DC-7 as long as the pilot saw and avoided other aircraft. There was no guaranteed vertical separation or continuous positive control. It was essentially an administrative workaround for a structural problem, reflecting the lack of adequate traffic control tools at the time. Around 10:30 a.m., both aircraft were at about 21,000 feet and closing in on each other at a relatively moderate angle, but with a very high rate of closure. When you add together the speeds of both planes, their approach speed easily topped 500 knots, meaning the time from the first visual sighting to impact would have been measured in just seconds. Inside the cockpit, spotting another airplane under those conditions was far from easy. Aircraft of the 1950s had thick structural supports, limited window area, and a lot of blind spots. On top of that, human vision has inherent physiological limits. The greatest level of detail is focused in a relatively small area of the visual field. An object on a constant collision course that doesn't move angularly against the background can remain almost motionless in the windshield until the final moments. Scattered clouds over the Grand Canyon area added yet another layer of difficulty, since even brief visual obstructions could erase any chance of early detection. There's no evidence that either flight crew was aware of the other aircraft until just moments before impact, if they saw it at all. The first physical contact happened when the United aircraft crossed into the Super Constellation's flight path from its left side, and the DC-7's left wingtip struck the leading edge of the Lockheed's central vertical stabilizer. This is a critical point, because the Super Constellation's triple tail design was intended to improve directional stability without making the tail excessively tall. Structurally, that area contained key components for yaw control and longitudinal stability. Immediately after that first contact, the collision instantly became catastrophic. The underside of the DC-7's left wing plowed into the upper rear fuselage of the Super Constellation with enormous kinetic force. The impact ripped the Constellation's fuselage open longitudinally, from just ahead of the tail all the way to a point near the main passenger door. The combination of shear with bending and torsional forces quickly exceeded the Lockheed structural limits, tearing the airframe apart. The result was that the Super Constellation's entire empennage separated almost instantly, meaning it lost both its horizontal and vertical stabilizers, and with them any ability to control pitch or yaw. In a matter of fractions of a second, the aircraft went from a stabilized flight to an unrecoverable condition. Without rear control surfaces, The center of pressure shifted abruptly, and the airplane entered an almost vertical descent, with no physical chance of recovery. The super Constellation ultimately crashed into the north slope of a ravine on the northeast side of Temple Butte, killing all 70 people on board. The DC-7 didn't survive the exchange of energy either. The collision destroyed much of its left outer wing, including critical sections of the aileron and likely part of the main spar. The aerodynamic imbalance that resulted, combined with the partial loss of lateral control, sent the aircraft into an uncontrollable maneuver. Although the fuselage remained more intact at first than that of the Super Constellation, the DC-7 entered a chaotic descent, before crashing violently into the rocky face of a canyon cliff known as Chuar Butte, claiming the lives of all 58 people aboard. The entire sequence, from the very first contact to the total loss of control of both aircraft, lasted less than a second. There was no time for effective radio calls or meaningful evasive action. The Civil Aeronautics Board's investigation was clear on one fundamental point. The probable cause was that neither flight crew saw the other aircraft in time to avoid the collision, as there was simply not enough time or visual opportunity for either crew to recognize and react before impact. No pre-existing mechanical failures or classic pilot errors were identified, and the investigation found nothing in the aircraft systems that could have prevented the collision. Instead, the accident was the result of a system that placed two fast, heavy passenger-laden airliners on the same flight path without any guaranteed separation, leaving no effective safeguards between them in uncontrolled airspace. The contributing factors identified as leading to the accident covered multiple interconnected levels of system and human performance issues. First, the lack of en route radar and the absence of an air traffic control system capable of providing positive separation were major contributing factors in the accident. Human vision limitations also played a key role, especially the physiological limits of sight, possible distractions from routine cockpit tasks, and the heavy cognitive load inherent in flying at high altitude under VFR flight rules. Finally, ambiguous clearances such as 1,000 on top created situations where the responsibility for maintaining separation fell squarely on the human crews. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. If you enjoyed this kind of content, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Your support is what makes it possible for me to keep creating these kinds of in-depth analyses and reconstructions, and it also helps you stay up to date with everything new we publish here. Before signing off, I'd really like to hear your thoughts in the comments, and know what you believe was the key factor that ultimately caused this air tragedy. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll be reading your comments, and I'll see you in the next video.